But last night, quite a big bombshell for the Telegraph newspaper.
Quite a big bombshell indeed. Two new parties reported in the Telegraph newspaper in the same building, number 10 Downing Street, on the same night, the night before Prince Philip's funeral. As one Tory MP put it to me, you couldn't wish for a worse day on which for number 10 to have a party to infuriate Tory MPs.
And do we know what I found really interesting, I mentioned at the top of the show that the government have issued an apology to Her Majesty the Queen, saying that this should not have happened. When the Prime Minister's spokesperson was asked to clarify what this meant, the words Sue Gray appeared once again, that basically they don't really want to say that this was a party. The report in the Telegraph talks about DJing in the basement. Didn't know Downing Street had a basement. But there was DJing in the basement and people were sent out to get bottles of booze in suitcases.
Just the one suitcase. We must get our facts right.
Just
We
the one
wouldn't want
Apologies.
to cast
Apologies.
aspersions about multiple suitcases. Surely just one
Apologies.
suitcase of wine is enough. Yes, and the further eye-raising fact in that Telegraph article was, of course, that one, possibly multiple civil servants had a go on little Wilf Johnson, the Prime Minister's toddler, his garden swing set, and they broke the swing set in their drunken revelries. So clearly this was what I think you and I would both look at and describe as a party. But Downing Street are, of course, being very, very cagey about this, and it is all about that senior civil servant, Sue Gray now. All eyes on her and her reports next week. Bit of an indication on the front page of the Times today about what that report may contain. It looks like it's more going to be a statement of the facts and of went wrong. She's not going to, therefore, make any judgments on top of that as to criminal allegations or as to specific people and whether they should apologise, resign, anything of that ilk.
Speaking of criminal allegations, what have you made of the Metropolitan Police who have said they're not going to investigate, they are going to wait and see? I mean, they're also giving the Sue Gray response. They're going to wait and see what the inquiry throws up.
They are, but they also put out quite a weird statement, I thought. The first half of the statement was talking about the way that they have chosen to enforce the coronavirus legislation throughout the pandemic. It talked about the 3 E's, which involve explaining to people what they're doing is wrong, encouraging to move on, and only enforcing if they don't get very far on that. And they say that they don't habitually investigate the past and past coronavirus infractions. But then, as you say, the next paragraph tells us that they are waiting for Sue Gray to finish her inquiry, and if she passes anything that implies criminal behaviour onto them, they will reassess the situation. So a bit of an internally contradictory statement there, really.
And what are we to make of the Prime Minister's statement at P&Q's? I mean, a lot of people have said that statement had been definitely gone through with lawyers. Remember, he was asked whether he had attended the party in question. This was the party that we knew about before last night. And actually, on last night's parties, it's important to clarify that the Prime Minister was not at home. He was already in Chequers. I think that's quite an important point. But going back to the Prime Minister's statement, initially when he was asked whether he attended the party, he said, you're going to have to wait for Sue Gray's inquiry, which was an odd response to give when someone's saying, were you there? You don't need an inquiry to tell you if you were there or not. But the Prime Minister's statement in the Commons rested, I think, and whether or not you agree with this, Charlotte, on his perception of what that event was. He said, I thought it was a work do. Cue lots of laughter from the benches opposite. But are we expected that Sue Gray can pass judgment on what the Prime Minister perceived to be a party or a work event? Surely she can't do. Those are matters that a jury would be asked to consider, not a civil servant, surely.
They are, and to be honest, a jury would really struggle with that one because, of course, you can't prove what a person thought when they looked at a scene. So it is quite a good way out there from Boris Johnson of being implicated. A few points for the prosecution, I suppose, to take our legal metaphor further. Carrie Johnson, the Prime Minister's then fiancée, now wife, attended the party with him. With her, reports ITV, were 2 aides to Michael Gove, not employees of 10 Downing Street. How did they end up there if this was a work event? Were they in for a meeting and chose to stick around? It slightly implies that there may have been some foreknowledge of the nature of this event, although we must also take Boris Johnson at his word. He didn't realise this was a party. We know as well that Boris Johnson turned up at the start time for the party. How did he know that he was meant to be there? Maybe he was told there was going to be a meeting in the garden. We also know, as you say, there are trestle tables set up with lots of drinks on them. Well, we already know that the Prime Minister, when he was pictured outside Downing Street with some wine and cheese on yet another separate occasion, described that as a work meeting. So maybe he's just comfortable seeing bottles of wine at a work meeting. So again, there is wiggle room there, but it does look pretty tricky for the Prime Minister.
The question I've been asking myself, Charlotte, about the Sue Gray inquiry, because everything seems to have ground to a halt now until we get the result of that inquiry. And I think there are rumours that we might be getting it on Tuesday next week. Would it be the end of the so-called Partygate? Because what if Sue Gray publishes her inquiry? And from what I understand, the inquiry goes first to the Prime Minister before anyone else has a look at it. But let's say the inquiry comes out. What if 2 days after the inquiry comes out, there are revelations of another party? Do we start the whole process all over again?
I think we probably do. And it is my understanding that there are more parties to come. I haven't been able to prove the existence of specific ones, but I certainly have spoken to people in government who say, yes, there are more, there were loads, watch this space. And of course, I'm not the only one currently having a look around. Every journalist on Fleet Street, I imagine right now, is trying to prove the existence of some of those parties.
Okay, so let's try and look ahead, because there are only two ways that a Prime Minister would cease to be Prime Minister. One is he decides to step down, possibly unlikely, we don't know, but Boris Johnson doesn't seem to be the type of Prime Minister, it's purely my own opinion, that would step down from a job that he's coveted pretty much his whole life. The other way is for those 54 letters to be handed in to the chairman of the 1922 committee. We've had, I think, Andrew Bridgen's put his letter in, Sir Roger Gale has put his letter in. A few others have come forward to say that they've put their letters in. What might the Conservative Party be thinking at the moment? Is it all about timing? Plenty of sources have been quoted as saying it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when the Prime Minister goes.
I would certainly agree with that assessment, given the amounts of comments I've had to that effect from Conservative MPs this week. At the moment, the broad consensus is that now is not the time to send your letter to the 1922 committee. There are two reasons for that. Firstly, there are those MPs who think that Boris Johnson can claw it back, so they won't send their letter in yet. It's not terminal yet. Secondly, there are Tory MPs who think he needs to go, but if there was a vote of no confidence tomorrow, he would survive it. And the rules of the Conservative Party mean if you survive a vote of no confidence, you are then safe from further challenge for a year. So there may be a tactical reason to delay, because, of course, once it hits 54 letters, that means there must be a confidence vote. Well, if you're thinking, how do I get the best chance of getting rid of him? Probably now is not quite right. The date that everyone keeps pointing to is those local elections in May. Pretty much any Tory will tell you they are expecting an absolute trouncing in the local elections. Does that become the point then where they can say, look, Boris Johnson, the people have made their judgment on you, so will we? Also, on practical terms, if they started a leadership contest now, a new leader would not have very long before those local elections, probably do pretty badly, and that would be a really bad start for them. Imagine your first act as leader of the country, leader of the Conservative Party, is just losing swathes of seats. It doesn't really set them up for a great victory at the general.
Also, what we've seen from the defenders of Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg was in this very studio speaking to John Pienaar. We've seen Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries go out in defence of Boris Johnson. A theme that seems to be rising is all the negativity from within the Conservatives have come from people who always criticised Boris Johnson. They were never really fans of Boris Johnson. I want to just briefly touch on the Douglas Ross situation. Douglas Ross came out and said if the Prime Minister was at that party, he should resign. This was before at PMQs. At PMQs, Boris Johnson admitted that he was at that party, albeit he thought it was a work to. And Douglas Ross stuck to his word and said, well, I'm going to stick to what I've said. I think he should stand down. Cue that little clip you heard earlier, Jacob Rees-Mogg calling him a lightweight figure. What does that do to the Conservative and Unionist Party?
nothing very good, certainly. And look, we've always known the Scottish Conservatives are not fans of Boris Johnson. You can see that from the fact that Douglas Ross's MSPs have all followed him in calling for Boris Johnson to resign. There has never been any love lost there. And in particular, if you speak to any Scottish Conservative, they will tell you Boris Johnson is politically toxic north of the border. If you ask people why they want independence, Boris Johnson's name comes up a lot on the doorstep. So that is the background for this. I think this is really interesting, to be honest. I think this could have a major impact. Can Douglas Ross turn around to people at the next general election and say, vote for the Conservative Party, vote for me, but also because, as you say, they're the Conservative and Unionist Party, vote for Boris Johnson to run your country? That is immensely tricky when he's previously called for him to go. I think really what we've seen here is those comments indicating before the next general election, one of them will have to be gone.